I'm a fan of the Harry Potter movies, and while I'm not much of a reader, I still have fond memories of reading the books. I love them for their creativity, their characters, and their storylines. But you can't make 8 movies without making a mistake or falling short every now and then. Therefore, I'd like to look at some of my least favorite parts of the Harry Potter movies. Keep in mind, this list is purely opinion-based. I judge this list solely on how I feel about it. Also, I'm not saying you're stupid for disagreeing. If you don't mind the things I'm about to mention, that's fine by me. Let's not waste any more time and start the list. Number 20. The visual effects of the Philosopher's Stone. For as much as I love the Philosopher's Stone, I have to admit some of the special effects are simply outdated. Mainly the CGI effects like the Troll, Fluffy or Norbert kind of break the immersion because of how fake they look. Or during Quidditch, I don't see Harry Potter flying on a broom, I see Daniel Radcliffe in front of a green screen. According to IMDb, even Chris Columbus admitted he wasn't satisfied with the visual effects, saying it was too rushed. In the later movies you can still tell when they use CGI, but it looks much more detailed and it mixes much better with the live action, so in these movies I don't mind at all. I can't be too harsh on the effects because of the time period the movie released in. The special effects of the time simply weren't as good as they are now. I respect the creators for trying not to overly rely on effects, and I still think most of the movie looks beautiful, but I would lie if I said some of the special effects didn't bother me. Number 19. Harry didn't get into trouble for that? This is one of the scenes where, if you're not familiar with the book or forgot what happened there, it may look like a really illogical conclusion to a dramatic scene. In this scene, Harry tries out a curse on Draco. Unbeknownst to Harry, this curse heavily injures Draco, nearly killing him. In the movie, Snape heals Draco's wounds and he looks angry at Harry. The scene ends there and it is never mentioned again. Upon rewatching the movies, I forgot what happened in the books, so this scene really confused me. So the movie says that if a student nearly kills another student, it is okay? It is just something that happens and shouldn't be bothered to look at? In the earlier movies, they are very strict about their rules. I might argue it's a little too strict, but I'll talk more about that later. But almost killing another student isn't important enough to take a second look? According to the Harry Potter wiki, Harry gets punished with a multitude of detentions and Professor McGonagall said Harry was lucky not to be suspended. This seems like a logical conclusion of this scene, but how it's treated in the movie, I think it falls short. Either show the conclusion with Harry getting detention or remove the scene altogether, because now I think it is a really confusing conclusion where it looks like the school doesn't really care about students heavily injuring each other. Number 18. The party twist of the Yule Ball. The Yule Ball scene is something the movie builds up to. It has wizards in fancy dresses, elegant music and a really beautiful and creative looking ballroom. The scene is perfect and just like I imagined it, until this happens.
Are you ready? Move your body like a hairy troll.
Not only does it come out of nowhere and is completely different than the tone this scene should have, but based on the amount of time passing by, it looks like it took only 1 minute for the rock music to start. During the rock scene, you can clearly see a lot of people have already left, meaning a lot of time has passed by while it looks like it took only a couple of minutes. It didn't give you time to enjoy the first band, but instead blindly jumped into the next one, and the contrast between the two is so big I didn't think the transition between the two worked well. There's a deleted scene where this song is a lot longer, and to be honest, it's better than the version we have now. I might have actually removed this scene from the list if the full version was in the movie. Sure, the song goes on for too long, but the transition is a lot better and actually gives you the time to take a breath. Here, the way the party ends makes a lot more sense because it feels like the party goes on for a lot longer. I still think it would have been better if they didn't include the rock band altogether, but if I were to choose, I would say the extended version is the better scene. For how it is now, the scene still looks good and story-wise it doesn't fall short, but this sudden twist felt out of place and I don't think it was needed. Number 17. The Snatchers chase.
Snatch 'em!
There are quite a number of chase scenes in the Deathly Hallows Part 1, and I think all of them are done well, except the Snatchers chase right before they're brought to Malfoy's home. Simply said, I think this is a poorly filmed and poorly edited scene. The entire chase is ridden with an overuse of the shaky cam effect, sloppy shots and fast cuts between the shots so you're barely able to see what the hell is going on. To top it all off, there's no music, which removes all the suspense I think the scene was going for. I have nothing more to say about this one, just a scene that simply isn't filmed and edited as well as the others, and fails to deliver the suspense it was trying to create. Number 16. Room of Requirements is discovered early by Argus Filch. The Room of Requirements plays an important part in the Order of the Phoenix. While in the books the build-up to Harry finding the room is well done, in the movie it happens rather sudden, like it is made up on the spot. That, I felt, could have been more developed in the movie, but it's more of a nitpick and I don't think it's executed exceptionally bad. But where it truly makes a mistake is when Argus Filch discovers that Dumbledore's army is using the room. They're not using the room for a couple of days, but for months. Do I seriously have to believe Argus knew about the whereabouts of the room for months and never caught a student going in? And did it really take months before he considered telling Dolores Umbridge? There are some very brief shots where you see Dolores talk to students, which implies Filch told her, but in the movie, Filch knows the exact location of the room and still doesn't manage to catch a student walking in. Months fly by and Filch is used as a running cat and mouse joke. One that, in my opinion, doesn't work because not taking direct action while knowing the exact location of the room feels like an out-of-character thing to do for both Dolores and Filch. Sometimes changes have to be made in order to make a story work as a movie, but this is a story element I feel would have made a lot more sense if it were like the book, and nobody would know about Dumbledore's army training until Dolores found out and immediately took action. Number 15. The cover arts of the sequels. This is something most people probably wouldn't care about with Harry Potter, but cover arts are some of my personal favorite styles of art. In a cover art, you try to capture the essence of your movie, book, game, comic, album, or other product. In a single picture, you try to suck the viewer into your movie, your world. Sometimes an artistic photo of the protagonist does the job, and sometimes chaotic covers with lots of different characters and colors are more interesting, as long as it is faithful to its product. Whenever I'm in a comic book store, I want to buy half the store just because all the cover arts are so damn awesome. But I digress. Harry Potter is a world with so much creativity, so many interesting story elements and characters, and yet the cover arts of the movies get seemingly lazier with each sequel. For the Philosopher's Stone, Drew Susan made an incredible piece of art that completely sucks you into the movie. Chamber of Secrets played differently with the colors, giving it a new feeling, and it shows some images iconic to this particular chapter in the series, like the Sword of Gryffindor or Dobby the Elf. But from the third one, all the covers have been them standing next to each other in front of Hogwarts or something else, without much effort to make it stand out. The composition feels lazy, not giving any of the movies a different feeling, and even the use of color feels like they don't always match the color pattern of the movie. For example, Order of the Phoenix uses a lot of blue, so the cover uses blue as a priority color, which is a good thing. But the Half-Blood Prince uses mostly dark yellow colors, and yet the cover is still blue, like the Order of the Phoenix. Shouldn't it look more dark yellow? I've looked at some of the different covers of the books, and I stumbled at some amazing cover arts. Arts that either focus on a certain part of the story, or they have a certain use of colors, composition, or lighting that makes them stand out. Something I wish the movies would have done. Don't get me wrong, I don't think the movie covers are ugly, I just think they could have done so much more with them than what they did now, and therefore the cover arts have a spot on the list. Number 14. The punishment for walking the school late at night. In the Philosopher's Stone, Harry, Ron and Hermione get punished because they walk the school at night. As punishment, they receive minus 150 points to Gryffindor.
50 each.
As well as being sent to the Dark Woods with Hagrid. Earlier in the movie, Hermione says to McGonagall she went out to look for a killer troll in order to fight it, which is actually a lie, but I don't care because McGonagall doesn't know it's a lie. An inexperienced first-year student, ignoring orders of the headmaster who said she needed to stay with the group and go to their room, is going out on a suicide mission to fight a dangerous troll that most likely would kill her. Gets a minus 5 points for Gryffindor and nothing else as punishment. Walking around at night in a school where nothing dangerous is going on, a school that Hagrid explicitly said is one of the safest places there is apparently so bad they get minus 150 points as a punishment. So according to McGonagall, a suicide mission is a minor mistake, but wandering around at night while there's nothing at the school to fear is an extremely irresponsible act? I'm gonna call bullshit on that one. But if that isn't enough, they're sent to the Dark Woods, a place that is forbidden to all students because of the dangers that lie within. These are first-year students that don't know how to defend themselves in case something goes wrong. And if that isn't enough, Hagrid decides to split. Good lord, now you're just asking for the students to get in serious problems. Why did McGonagall think this was a legitimate punishment? Wouldn't detention be a lot more logical and above all, safer for the students? The only reason I can think of why McGonagall decides to give this punishment is because the circumstances are more urgent than they look at first sight. Maybe she is well aware of the fact that Voldemort tries to find the Philosopher's Stone, and therefore she is much stricter about the rules. Not just for the safety of the students, but to lower the chances of Voldemort tricking one of the students into telling him information, or something like that. Which would make a bit more sense, but because this is never explained, the punishment seems needlessly harsh for vague reasons. Therefore, it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. Number 13. Ron doesn't replace his wand.
Ferroverto.
Early on in the Chamber of Secrets, Ron breaks his wand, but for some reason he never considers replacing it. Nor does the school have some kind of policy that students without the wand aren't allowed to do spells, which seems illogical to me. There are multiple scenes that show Ron isn't able to perform spells correctly with his wand being broken. The spells either have a different outcome or it backfires. For a school that is all about magic and performing spells, having a wand that functions perfectly fine seems like the #1 priority for each student. Yet the movie never gives a reason for him to keep his wand. It's not that he doesn't have the money or that there's no other wand that fits him. The only reason he keeps the wand is for the convenience of the plot. Gilderoy steals Ron's wand in an attempt to escape. When he tries to curse Ron and Harry, the curse backfires and it hits himself. If the wand didn't break, it would mean Gilderoy would have cursed Ron and Harry, giving the story a bad ending. From a convenience point of view, it's essential to the outcome of the plot, but from a logical point of view, it doesn't make any sense. He should have replaced it as soon as possible. Number 12. Jokes that feel out of place.
The Ministry doesn't send people to Azkaban for blowing up their aunt.
This one is heavily opinion-based, and I've heard various opinions on the subject matter, but personally, I don't think some of the attempts at humor of the Prisoner of Azkaban work. In fact, I think some of them are rather out of place and don't make much sense. For example, the Fat Lady. In the first movie, the Fat Lady is exactly how I imagined her. Calm and kind, but in The Prisoner of Azkaban they changed her into comic relief. Her trait is she sings really loud and really bad. This is something the original Fat Lady, a character that we've already been introduced to even though it was briefly, would never do. She also overreacts to things that happen, making her character feel much more like a cartoon character rather than a Harry Potter character in my opinion.
He's here! Somewhere in the castle! Sirius Black!
Or in the scene where the Whomping Willow grabs Hermione and slings her all around, the Whomping Willow conveniently pauses for a brief moment so that Hermione can comically grab Harry and drag him along with her. When you look at the speed at which Hermione is slung around, it wouldn't be possible for her to grab Harry like this. This joke makes no sense. There's also a joke that I never really understood. The monster behind the door in the leaky cauldron. What monster is in the room? I don't recall Harry being surrounded by monstrous beings during this part in the book, let alone a possibly giant monster like this can overstay in the inn and act aggressively against the cleaning lady. I think the joke is that the cleaning lady gets a completely different reaction from the monster than the audience expects, but based on logic, I simply get confused with this joke because I have no clue what could possibly be in this room. Therefore, I am not able to tell what is going on in the scene. The last running joke I'd like to tackle are the Dray heads. They're made up for the movie and they're used for the in-your-face kind of humor. What I mean by that are the characters that have commentary on everything and blurt out as many small jokes as possible, while I don't think any of their lines really work. The reason why I'm only picking The Prisoner of Azkaban for this topic is not because I think the jokes of all the others are masterpieces. The other movies definitely have moments that try to be funny but don't work, but in all the other movies the jokes at least felt in character. It felt like something the characters I knew and loved would do. It at least felt like it was hitting the right tone that fits into the Harry Potter universe. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, I felt like the tone didn't match the tone of the book and the rest of the series. These moments, to me, didn't feel like I was watching Harry Potter. With exception of the cat and mouse joke with Filch in the Order of the Phoenix, these are the only moments in the series that really made me feel like the jokes were too forced. Not to say none of the moments are funny, because there are some funny parts. I especially like this part.
It may just be the last thing you ever do. Now, who'd like to come and say hello? Well done, Harry. Well done.
But for the others, not so much. Number 11. All those bloody coincidences. Characters being lucky is often necessary in stories in order to progress them. Plans can often easily fail because of one mistake that shatters the entire story. Everything has to go according to plan, as risky as the plan can be. As a result, the way the story progresses can feel a bit too coincidental, and the characters, both heroes and villains, seem very lucky that their plan even got this far. Technically, I can complain about all the Harry Potter movies with this argument, but that would be unfairly nitpicky and they honestly don't bother me much. But I have to admit that in Chamber of Secrets and in the Goblet of Fire, I find the coincidences sometimes a bit too much to take. For example, the fact that all the students who are attacked have been petrified instead of killed made them very lucky. Or the fact that Ginny decides to write in the book she knows isn't hers, or the luck that no one notices Lucius Malfoy putting the book in the cauldron. But also, Harry destroys one of Voldemort's Horcruxes without even realizing it. It is made very clear there are very few ways to destroy a Horcrux, a tooth of a basilisk being one of them. And wouldn't you know it, Harry actually fights a basilisk when one of the Horcruxes is near. Accidentally, a tooth gets stuck in his hand. What are the odds? And he walks with the tooth in his hand all the way to the book where he actually gets the idea of using the tooth as a weapon to destroy the book. Not knowing it's one of Voldemort's Horcruxes and not knowing a basilisk's tooth is one of the few ways to destroy one. That's quite a lot of luck there. Also, Voldemort's plan in the Goblet of Fire seems too damn risky and could go wrong in numerous ways. Maybe the teachers make the decision not to let Harry join the tournament, or maybe Harry himself would refuse to take part. I know he's bound by magical contract, but the movie doesn't explain what that means. Does it mean that he dies if he doesn't show up, or if the teachers refuse to let him join? Even if I ignore that, maybe the dragon would have killed Harry. Maybe he wouldn't find out how to discover the message within the egg. Maybe someone would have found out Bartemius was drinking polyjuice potions in all those months. Maybe Harry would have lost to the 3 older and more experienced contesters. Maybe Harry and Cedric would have grabbed the trophy in time in order to escape the graveyard. It's not that Voldemort was waiting with an army. He gives Harry the time to escape if Harry only realized what was going on a little sooner. There are so many ways Voldemort's plan could have gone wrong, it's hard for me to ignore how much luck is involved. Don't get me wrong, I still love the Chamber of Secrets and the Goblet of Fire, and we do see Bartemius helping Harry as much as he can, which does make it more likely for Harry to win. I don't think it's impossible for these things to have happened the way they happen in the story, but of all the Harry Potter movies, I find these coincidences the hardest to accept. Number 10. They don't pause Quidditch even when the game is heavily interrupted. Quidditch is a creative sport that perfectly fits into the Harry Potter universe, but one thing that feels very off to me is the fact that they never pause the game, even when it's obvious the game is being heavily interrupted. In the first movie, Harry's broom is controlled by Quirrell, causing Harry to have no control over where he's going and nearly falling off his broom. Everyone in the audience notices what's going on, and yet nobody thinks it's a legit reason to stop the game. But it doesn't stop with the Philosopher's Stone. In the Chamber of Secrets, one of the bludgers is bewitched, so that it only follows Harry. Again, nobody seems to think this is a legit reason to stop the game. If that isn't enough, in The Prisoner of Azkaban, Harry is attacked by a Dementor who tries to suck his soul out, making him slip off his broom, nearly falling to his death. Is this a reason to stop the game? No. They lost the game even though he got attacked by a monster. Why don't they just train some dragons to attack the pitchers while they're at it? In real life, no sport would come away with cheating this obvious, or the game would be stopped if the players were suddenly attacked or otherwise interrupted. I fail to see why Quidditch always goes on, no matter what happens. For as much fun as it is to watch when played right, it seems like it creates a heavily unbalanced and needlessly dangerous sport when they let interruptions like this slide. Number 9. Is the wizard world truly secret to Muggles? The wizards are unknown to Muggles, at least that's what the movies say, but I find this a bit hard to believe. While I was watching the Philosopher's Stone as a kid, without reading the books at the time, I was convinced the wizard world is a completely separate world from the world of Muggles, and that the only way to enter either worlds was through portals like Platform 934. But this isn't the case. The Muggle world and wizard world are one and the same. With this in mind, I simply think it's hard to take the fact that wizards are secret to Muggles seriously. For example, the monsters. There isn't one species of monsters in one part of the world, there are a ton of monsters all over the world. Werewolves, dragons, trolls, and lots of other monsters. Since Muggles live in the same world as wizards, how did all those monsters stay unnoticed? It's not until I talked with some friends who told me about the Muggle repellent spell, something I completely forgot about and isn't mentioned until the 4th movie, and even then you might miss it if you don't know it's there, that I understood why this is the way it is. A Muggle repellent spell doesn't just make things invisible and muted to humans, but also affects their brains so they won't go into an enchanted area. Although the movies don't make this clear, it is in the book, so I can't be too harsh on them since you can't add every little detail in the movie. But my problem doesn't stop there. For example, how they act on platform 934. They don't even try to make sure Muggles don't see them. They run straight past them against a giant wall. Look, a man passes by very closely and he doesn't even turn his head. If someone would run at a giant wall I was standing next to, I at least would have turned my head to see what the hell the person is doing. Did seriously nobody notice them? Or how about the elevator from the Order of the Phoenix? Harry and Arthur don't use the Muggle repelling spell to make it look like they aren't there, but they stand in an ordinary phone booth that goes down slowly. If someone happened to watch them or someone happened to walk by, they would have easily been noticed. It doesn't stop with methods of transportation. Think of all the Muggles with wizard family members. There are a ton of wizards with 1 or 2 Muggle parents. Those parents are all familiar with the wizard world. But not just the parents, also the brothers and sisters, maybe even close Muggle friends and lovers. The only reason I can think of why magic is truly a secret to Muggles is that might be a department in the Ministry of Magic that focuses on Muggle repelling and memory erasure spells, and that the only Muggles that stayed unnoticed by the Ministry or stayed untouched by the Muggle repelling spell either never saw something magical or didn't have any proof that what they saw was real. I wouldn't mind if Muggles were familiar with the wizard world, and I honestly don't think it would have that much of an impact on the story. But when the movies treat the wizard world like it's perfectly hidden and stayed a secret for God knows how many years, I simply find it hard to believe. Number 8. Scene where they get caught trying to travel to London. On the number 19 spot, I said the Sanctum Sempra scene was confusing because it didn't explain what the consequences of Harry's actions were well enough. Therefore, it seemed like he didn't get punished, which felt illogical. But in that scene, I could at least give the argument of Harry getting punished off screen. I still don't think it's a good way of explaining it, but it at least gives you enough information to make the conclusion on your own. Based on the importance of being familiar with what happens in the book, I think this is easily the least good scene in all of the Harry Potter movies because it has the one "how the hell did that happen" moment after the other. It starts with Harry telling Ron and Hermione he wants to go to London in an attempt to save Sirius because in a vision he saw Sirius being tortured by Voldemort. He makes the decision to go to Dolores Umbridge's office in order to use the flu network. Till this point, the scene makes total sense. Then, out of the blue, Dolores shows up. How did she get unnoticed in the office so fast after Harry's arrival? This I can overlook, but what truly got me out of the immersion is that the next moment she brings in Ginny and Neville, who have been captured by the Inquisitorial Squad. Harry told only Ron and Hermione about his plan to rescue Sirius, so why did Ginny and Neville suddenly get involved? They didn't know about Harry's plan for as far as the movie shows, so the Inquisitorial Squad has no reason to have captured them. Were they just stalking Harry or did someone talk to them off screen? The next moment, Dolores follows Harry and Hermione to the dark woods all alone. Wait a minute. A character that is all about control, power and planning suddenly follows 2 experienced wizards all alone with no dialogue to back up this decision? She could have said, "Take their wands away and watch the rest. I can handle this on my own," or something like that. It would have been a more logical follow-up than just immediately cutting to them being in the woods. I know stories don't always have to scribble out every itty-bitty detail, but this scene just had so many things that felt off in a short period of time that I simply couldn't ignore it. Number 7. The bootstrap paradox creates confusing time travel rules. Each movie has its own time travel rules. For an example, I'll take the Back to the Future movies. In the first Back to the Future movie, Marty travels to the year 1955 and prevents his parents from meeting each other, thus creating a new timeline where his parents never met. The rules in Back to the Future say that no matter how similar the outcome of the new timeline is to the previous one, if you were to travel to the year 1955, you'd always end up in the timeline where Marty prevents his parents from meeting each other. That is, unless you create a new timeline where the future is also changed, in which case you'll end up there. But no matter what happens, the original timeline is erased from existence. You can never travel back to the timeline where Marty didn't show up in the year 1955. In Harry Potter, things work differently. In Harry Potter, there's always one timeline with no different outcomes. If somebody time travels, his or her future self is part of the current timeline, as we see with Harry and Hermione. Their future selves are responsible for things happening in the current timeline, and no matter what they'll do, the outcome will always be them traveling back in time to save themselves because the future is written. This is what confuses me so much, because it creates a paradox. The bootstrap paradox, to be exact. The bootstrap paradox is a paradox of time travel that occurs when a later event is the cause of an earlier event through some sort of time travel. In Harry Potter, no matter how you look at it, it would never have been possible for Harry to travel back in time, because without their future selves rescuing them, they would die. They would either be killed by the werewolf or Harry's soul would be sucked out by the Dementor. If I were to apply this theory to fanfictions, it means that the how it should have ended joke where Snape travels back in time to kill Voldemort wouldn't be possible because there's only one timeline, and if Snape didn't kill Voldemort in the only existing timeline, there's no way this otherwise could happen. But then again, if he had actually traveled back and killed Voldemort, it means that the moment that led him to travel back in time wouldn't happen, therefore it wouldn't be possible for him to time travel in the first place. Yeah, this logic isn't quite the most flawless time travel logic. Does this mean it's a bad climax altogether? No, I still think it's decent. I like how they give you all kinds of hints throughout the movie, and it plays on your memories and expectations, but when I dive deep into it, I just get confused because of the bootstrap paradox. Now, I have a little confession to make about this list. Most people would probably expect me to build up to some huge plot hole or some fantastic moment of the book they disappointingly left out of the movie, the absence of John Williams' music in the sequels, or a horribly executed scene, but the truth is, I don't think there really is such a thing as an outstandingly horrible Harry Potter moment. I had big trouble even coming up with a satisfying top 10, let alone top 20. I'm sure there are plenty of critics or other people who could come up with something they totally despise, but keep in mind, this list is opinion-based. Like I said earlier, I love the Harry Potter movies, and even though I have problems with the movies, I don't think any of the problems are unspeakably bad. I love being in the world, I love following the characters, and I love the storylines. So what I'm gonna do now is a little bit different than what you may expect. There is no order in the next 6, nor do I think they're particularly worse than other items I've mentioned on the list. What I'm gonna do now is talk about the things I think are pretty good, but I kinda dislike them for not being fantastic, if you know what I mean. Things that I think, if pulled off perfectly, might have pushed me to give one or more Harry Potter movies a rating of a 9 or a 10. Things that could have made me teary-eyed or even calling it one of my favorite movie series. They may not be as big or flawed as some of the other things I've named, and maybe a lot of people love these moments, but I think they could have been better and are just what the movies need to truly win over me to call it one of my favorite series. Let's not waste any more time and start the final 6. Number 6. Daniel Radcliffe doesn't always give a decent performance. I think most adult actors couldn't have been cast more perfectly. Alan Rickman as Snape, Robbie Coltrane as Hagrid, Gary Oldman as Sirius Black, Imelda Staunton as Dolores Umbridge, Jim Broadbent as Horace Slughorn, and many others. But when it comes down to Harry Potter himself, played by Daniel Radcliffe, I've got mixed feelings. His performance is often rather stiff, and he doesn't always succeed in showing his emotions. When it comes down to happiness or anger, I'll buy it. His smile or the angry look in his eyes, I think Daniels pulls these off very well. But when it comes down to sadness, curiosity, fear or jealousy, I see someone trying to act these emotions, but not the character actually feeling these emotions. According to an interview with the Daily Mail, even Daniel Radcliffe himself has said that he isn't satisfied with some of his deliveries for the series. On The Half-Blood Prince, he said, "My acting is very one-note and I can see it got complacent. I think it heavily varies on which scene, and usually I don't mind anymore after 20 minutes into the movie, but it does distract. It could have been a fantastically well-acted protagonist, but instead it's a varied, overall decent acting protagonist." Number 5. How the relationship with Ginny is treated in the movies. The relationship with Ginny is, in my opinion, one of the strongest parts of the last 2 books. The way they act towards one another before the relationship starts feels very real, like how actual teenagers act when they're in love, but don't know how to express it. The way they start off the relationship makes total sense, the way they're treated makes total sense, and especially the way Harry tries to end the relationship in the end of The Half-Blood Prince gives it a lot more depth and says something about these 2 characters. In the movies, however, they use the bare minimum in order to develop the relationship. There is development, it's not something that comes out of nowhere. We see Harry look at her and we see him talk about her, but we never really see them interact besides those kisses. Ginny has attitude, she is smart, and she is prepared to put serious effort in if she wants something, but the movie never shows these character traits based on the dialogue. Even the scenes they do share together feel like they use a minimum amount of development, and they could have made more of it. For example, I think a scene of just them sitting at the fireplace together and talking about nothing, just enjoying themselves, would have been an excellent way to develop the relationship, or show the audience the breakup. It would have said much about the characters, and it would even say more about the scenes with them together in the sequels. I remember a chapter in the Deathly Hallows book where Harry returns to Hogwarts and has a discussion with Ginny about how he missed her, immediately followed by a fight about how she needs to stay away from the dangers and hide in an attempt to save herself. This part is really strong in the books and completely left out of the movie. I'm convinced this isn't a matter of budget that wasn't high enough, because you didn't need to make new sets. You had the actors together and you had the set the chapter took place in. Sometimes all a scene really needed was a little extra dialogue. But one of my biggest complaints with the two, something I'll delve into more later, is when Harry Potter dies, or at least fake dies. The person Ginny had a crush on for years since she was very young, the person who she had a relationship with and cared about deeply, died and she sees the dead body being carried in front of her eyes. In the books, she is torn apart about this. She is totally crushed by witnessing Harry's dead body. In the movie, she seems worried, but not torn apart or anything. She screams once, but then seems to regain control. She doesn't nearly have the reaction she should have.
No! No!
It makes their feelings toward each other, which is strong in the book, not half as present in the movie. I feel like this could have been changed with rewriting of the script or the 1 or 2 extra scenes of them being together. Number 4. Deaths aren't given the proper treatment.
Mador is dead.
A lot of characters die in the last 2 Harry Potter movies. Not just characters that have shown up briefly and you didn't have much time to bond with, but even characters that we've known since some of the early books. Even though the movie rightfully addressed these deaths and does make time for them, I felt like it wasn't enough. For example, I've already talked about how I'm not satisfied with Ginny's reaction to Harry's death, but her reaction is not the only one. Hagrid himself is supposed to carry Harry in tears. The image of a crying Hagrid carrying the dead body of Harry could have been a really strong image, but instead Hagrid seems more like he's a little shocked and scared rather than feeling sad. No tears or really that much of a sad face feels like a missed opportunity to make it a truly bullseye-hitting moment. Even the response of Ron and Hermione feels like they're more scared than sad. Harry just died and nobody shed even one tear? I know you don't have to cry about everything, but this is your protagonist, a protagonist you've been following for 8 movies. At least some tears would be expected if he died. The scene didn't have to be longer, just the same pacing with a crying Hagrid and a crying Ginny I think would have made a much bigger impact than it does now. Some other deaths go by really fast. Hedwig, Alastor Moody, Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks. I get that with so many characters you can't have a 10-minute goodbye saying for each character. I actually don't really mind the fast deaths of these 4 characters, but I do mind the death of Fred Weasley. He's such a lovely character, one of the 2 comic relief brothers that have been there since the start. The scene is a 20-second part where Harry stands on a distance and looks at a crying Weasley family, then his attention goes to Lupin and Tonks, not mentioning Fred's death again or even going up close. Of all the characters, I feel this one is the biggest miss. The scene would be much better if Harry saw a crying Weasley family, walked up close to see what they're crying about, seeing George crying on the corpse of Fred, giving Ron and Ginny a comforting hug so that they can cry their loss out, as well as giving the audience a chance to let the news sink in and cry along with them, which probably would take 1 to 2 minutes. How it's done now goes by so fast it doesn't make that strong of an impact. Well, at least the deaths are still there. I appreciate the movie for addressing them. The death scene of Dobby and Dumbledore are really strong scenes and show the movies can definitely have a strong pacing when it comes down to death scenes, but the death of Fred and the fake death of Harry in particular I feel could have been much stronger than they are now. Number 3. The lack of colors and bright lights in most of the sequels. This is something I also heard heavily varying opinions about. Personally, I always preferred the bright and colorful style used in the Chris Columbus movies. It makes the world truly feel like the magical and wondrous place described in the books, a place I would like to visit and I love watching. The Chris Columbus movies have a perfect variation on colors and lighting, making the happy moments bright and colorful, or the night scenes an atmospheric dark blue, giving each scene a different feel. But some parts of the sequels, especially in The Prisoner of Azkaban and Deathly Hallows Part 1, I feel like they way overdid the darkness and the lack of colors. A dark and colorless scene should be used for an unpleasant moment, like when they encounter a serious threat or when a character is emotionally damaged by some sort of loss. For example, the Triwizard Maze scene. There's barely any light source, so it makes total sense for it to be dark. But also, the characters aren't familiar with all the possible dangers that lie ahead. Every second they could stumble upon some kind of dangerous threat. In this scene, the darkness and lack of colors match the tone of the story. but the Prisoner of Azkaban and Deathly Hallows often have a lack of colors and dark lighting when nothing really dark is going on. Like this scene. Sirius is telling Harry about how Harry can live with him instead of the Dursleys. This is supposed to be a charming and touching moment, and yet it is so incredibly dark, half their faces are pitch black. It doesn't match the tone of the scene. It makes the scene less interesting than it otherwise would have been, in my opinion. Or even when they're in a classroom having lessons, the remarkable decrease of bright colors just doesn't look good to me. With some scenes, if you're not in a completely dark room, it's actually pretty hard to make out what the hell is going on. But it's not just these movies. In the Goblet of Fire, when the other schools enter Hogwarts, it is very dark, as if something bad is about to happen. Aren't the other schools supposed to have an impressive entrance that shows you the grandness of their schools? Doesn't removing the colors and greatly decreasing the brightness take away the feeling of impressiveness? Or in the Deathly Hallows Part 2, when Voldemort is approaching with his army, you can barely see it until you're up close. If you don't have a clear view on the grandness of his army, it takes away part of his intimidation. The camera perspectives and compositions of these scenes I still think are pretty good. I don't think the use of colors is bad from start to end, I just think they went too far with the diminishing of colors and bright lights by applying it to scenes that don't need to be dark. Some people love the dark tone and think it fits the adult tone of the later movies, but personally, I would have loved it more if they toned down a notch. Number 2. The removal of good scenes.
I don't think you're a waste of space.
Thanks.
Harry Potter is a world I love to be in. 20 minutes into these movies and I'm completely immersed in the movie, not thinking about my life. Each Potter movie has deleted scenes, and even though they're not important to the story, I do think all of the deleted scenes are still scenes I want to see in the movie. The first 2 films especially, they have about 15 minutes of deleted scenes, including one of the Chamber of Secrets where you see Draco and his father talk to each other in the store. Is this important to the story? No, but it does say something about how Draco is treated by his father, how the Malfoys act when no one is watching, which gives a better understanding of the character of Draco. Or there's a scene where Harry overhears other wizards talking about how they think Harry is the killer who attacked the wizards. In a deleted subplot, Harry actually gets sad and starts doubting himself. For a moment, he was actually convinced he might be the killer without knowing it. Story-wise, this scene goes nowhere, but it does show Harry actually cares about what others have to say. He actually can doubt himself, he thinks he can be flawed and he can be uncertain. This is a side we rarely see of Harry, and it only makes him feel much more alive, much more human. Scenes like this, even the short and unimportant ones, I think make the world feel more alive and often give more depth to the characters. Unfortunately, there are only extended versions of the first 2 movies. At least, I never managed to find versions of the sequels with the deleted parts in it. It's not only scenes they removed that are on the disc. According to IMDb, they filmed a scene for the Deathly Hallows Part 2, where Draco throws his wand at Harry in an attempt to fight the Death Eaters. Why would this important detail not make the final cut? For how the movie currently is edited, it looks like Draco chooses the side of the Death Eaters. Knowing he was prepared to throw his own wand at Harry with Voldemort standing right in front of him would have said a lot about what the character was feeling and thinking throughout the last movies, and where he would stand in the end. Or in the Deathly Hallows Part 1, Harry actually says goodbye to the Dursleys, which is a surprisingly touching scene.
Do you think I don't know what they're capable of? You didn't just lose a mother that night in Godric's Hollow, you know. I lost a sister.
Why isn't this in the final cut? I could go on and on, but you get my point. I always watch the full versions of the movies I can find full versions of, because I think it's a shame they removed a lot of these scenes. Number 1. Snape's memory scenes are too rushed. Before you might freak out, I think this is a good scene. I don't think this is a bad scene at all, don't get me wrong. So why did I choose this order for the final 6 after I said there isn't really an order from 6 onward? Why of all the things would I still pick this on number 1 above the other 5 problems I address? Let me explain. Snape is a very mysterious character throughout the majority of the series. He seems to despise Harry and use every chance to make Harry's life miserable. Yet he does legitimately care about Harry's well-being and tries his best to keep Harry safe. In my opinion, the reveal of Snape's backstory might be the most important part in all of the books. I haven't read many books, but I can easily say this chapter is my favorite chapter from anything I've ever read. The entire character, a character you've known and loved for years, is suddenly pushed into a different perspective. Everything he had done until that point made sense if he was evil and served Voldemort. And yet, in this chapter about his memories, everything he did made total sense for completely different reasons. In the book, this is a perfectly written and built up scene. In the movie, it's pretty good. But that's kinda my problem. Since I think it's the most important part of the book, pretty good isn't the reaction I'm hoping for. The memories go by so fast, and there are so many cuts between the shots, it's hard to get really invested in the memories they try to recreate. I would have loved to watch them getting to know each other as kids for longer, or how James Potter influenced their contact. The lighting, color, and environments are absolutely beautiful, as well as that the cast for their younger selves is perfect. But the editing is a little bit sloppy and has this rushed feeling to it. They use the same editing and pacing style in the Order of the Phoenix, where you get to see James Potter bullying Snape. This also is paced so hastily that there's barely any time to really let the moment sink in. James was a bully and isn't really the icon Harry hoped to be. James is one of the main reasons Snape hates Harry. This is an important scene also, developing both Snape's and Harry's character, and slightly foreshadowing the point where the contact between Snape and Lily got to a definitive stop. Since this scene is so rushed, it doesn't really leave the impact it should have. The scenes still work. The memories in Deathly Hallows Part 2 still take pretty long and take enough time for you to buy what happens. But the reason why I eventually decided to put this on number 1 isn't because I think this scene is bad, but the reason is that of all the scenes in Harry Potter, including the scenes I'm not fond of, this is the scene I wish was written and edited differently the most. So that was my top 20 dumbest Harry Potter moments. I hope you enjoyed it and thanks for watching.